But Randai is a folk theater form, and it's kind of found in the, well, more remote upper highlands of Sumatra. I've actually put a map in here just so you can kind of get a sense. So all of this is Indonesia. 13,000 plus islands. Each one has different ethnic groups, different languages, different cultures, quite diverse. Most of it is Malay related. And Minangkabau are one of like 350 distinct ethnic groups within the Republic of Indonesia. And the area where they live has been so remote that actually not a lot of Hindu Buddhist influences came into the area, just like we find more in Java, for example. So it's quite distinct in its own way, very distinct own language, very distinct cultural practices. And only in the last 200 years or so has there been major connection with other regions of Southeast Asia. So the Minangkabau are probably one of the last remaining large matrilineal societies, meaning that the inheritance is passed down the mother line. Yeah, and traditional village life is still so where everybody lives in the house called the Rumah Gadang, or big house of the oldest female elder in a clan. Yeah, nowadays in the big cities, of course, it's all modern and nuclear families live in separate houses, but a lot of the villages still have that social structure. So they have the matrilineal setup, which comes under what is known throughout the Malay world as adat, customs and traditions. And that's one of the major pillars of society. The other major pillar nowadays is Islam. But even Islam as practiced by the Minangkabau people is one of the older Islam branches that came in kind of early, and it's more related to Sufi Islam and not so much to what's called more orthodox desert Islam. Although that's the latest wave that's kind of come in the 20th century. But in the early like 18th, 19th century, the Islam they first encountered was definitely more the Sufi type of Islam, which embraced a lot of animistic traditions, which were of course also quite ingrained in the adat system of the Minangkabau in their own culture. One of the really interesting aspects of the adat is a principle they call rantau. And rantau refers to what they call kind of voluntary temporary migration. And in the old days, it was expected of the young boys, the moment they hit puberty or before they hit puberty, to move out of the mother's house, go to their own surau, called them like the men's house, finish their education there, and then go abroad. And abroad in that context could mean anything as close as just the next village down the stream. And nowadays it means maybe all the way to Jakarta, or all the way to Singapore, or all the way to one of the bigger cities. And the whole point of going rantau was to really kind of grow up, to further round out your education, have some adventures in the process, of course, hopefully, make some gains, become prosperous, and then come back, settle down, and marry and start a family. Nowadays, that's also expected of girls. So rantau has really remained a very strong custom in the Minangkabau culture, but now it's extended out to women also expected to do that. And it's a really smart thing to do. I mean, I always encourage my students, kind of go rantau for a little bit, like go study abroad, go somewhere else, broaden your horizons, don't stick in the same place all your life. I mean, there's advantages to that too, but in our culture these days, I think it has great advantages to really not just visit, but actually live abroad for a little bit. So rantau, and you have to come back, otherwise it's not called rantau. Otherwise it's called what they call rantau Cina, which refers to the Chinese way of migration, which is basically you go there and you settle down. So it's not meant for you to leave and never come back, because whatever you learned abroad, you're supposed to bring back to your village or to your home clan, and everybody should benefit from it. Yeah. So, and of course it happens, especially nowadays, that a lot of people either find great business opportunities or start university somewhere or fall in love and marry and then never come back except for maybe a visit. So that's not what they mean when they say rantau. Okay. So anyway, the reason I bring up the rantau concept is it's really important in the Randai training. Yeah. First of all, a lot of those schools, informal schools that were set up in the old days before they had public school system by the government of Indonesia, those schools where they taught Randai were kind of like the main source of educating the young generation about the culture, customs, traditions, etiquette, language, everything. Later on, they expanded as Islam became more prominent. They also expanded to include training about Islam, proper way of life for Muslim, Quran recitals, all of that then got wrapped into it. And also Randai theater itself, of course, is used as a teaching tool in that context. So if you go rantau to the village down the river, you will be joining one of those houses, those teaching houses, and learn Randai from that area and also martial arts and learn the culture of that specific location through the silat, through the arts, through recitals and oratory. And of course, another connection between rantau and Randai is that a lot of times you travel, especially, picture yourself in the 18th century, 19th century, alone on the road in the jungle, in the upper highlands of Sumatra. And it's not easy. It's not totally safe. So every time you leave home, it's dangerous, right? So of course you have adventures. And of course, when you come back, you have to tell those adventures, right? And you tell those oftentimes through Randai theater. They become stories that are then portrayed in Randai theater or in some of those other oratory traditions that are feeding into Randai. Yeah. So Randai is performed really in a lot of different contexts. It's performed for individual celebrations. Let's say, if I have a daughter, she's getting married, I want to have a party for her. One of the evening entertainments for sure will be a Randai performance. So the family celebration or the individual celebrations will certainly include a Randai performance and other entertainment. If the village has a celebration on the village level, please.
A few of my students have to go to another class.
Thank you. They have other commitments today. So the village level also has celebrations. Like everybody got together and dug a new irrigation ditch, or the elementary school got a new roof or whatever. You need to celebrate. The whole community will put on a Randai. Or if you graduated from Islamic school, your family might put a Randai on for you to celebrate that. So really on all levels of society, in all kinds of contexts, Randai is appropriate. And generally speaking, people don't really have to pay to see a show. It's typically the sponsor system, meaning that one person will pay the troupe to perform and then everybody in the village is kind of free to attend. There's some occasions on which maybe a Randai would be put on as a fundraiser to collect money to expand the rooms in the school or something. But that's kind of rare in comparison. So where did Randai really come from? Basically, there's three major roots that Randai has. And they are Silek, which is the Minangkabau way of saying Silat, which is the indigenous martial arts of the Minangkabau people. But they're not the only ones who have a martial art. There's many other Silat or Pencak Silat genres all through Indonesia, all through the Malay world, and they do share a lot of features. But still, they're distinct enough so you can actually say, there's a very distinct Minangkabau style of doing Silek. And even within that, there's like 12 distinct styles and schools, sub-styles within that tradition. So that's one of the strongest roots in terms of the movement repertoire, philosophy, the patterns, the spatial arrangement, and all that. The second one is called Bakaba, just means to tell a story. Kaba is story, Bakaba in Minang means to tell a story. And that typically has a single storyteller, and he either accompanies himself or has a secondary player on a rebab, like a Arab-influenced fiddle. Sometimes it's really super simple. They just have a little matchbox they shake for sound effects. This is like mini theater, right? It's one person telling the story with a little bit of percussion on the side. Sometimes there's secondary assistant that will maybe throw in a second voice or have a dialogue, but that's pretty much it. So that's where all the stories come from and are preserved out of the oral tradition of the Minang, legends, folk tales, and all that comes out of this Bakaba tradition. And then there's another very old tradition which is called Dendang and Salwang, which is a combination of typically two singers and one flute player who plays a very long bamboo flute, and that one is played through circular breathing, which anybody who's a musician knows that circular breathing is quite a hard feat. Yeah, so the breath continues, you're breathing in as you're breathing out, and you're playing. So the sound is really continuous, and that's one of the things that is considered aesthetically beautiful. Yeah. So we have those three branches that have come together and form the components of Randai theater. Yeah. The overall performance structure of a, let's say, evening length show of 4 to 5 hours, it does go that long. Wow. Would be to have an opening parade where all the musicians and all the dancers file in different arrangements of lines. Then they all sit down in an invocation prayer. And in the old days, that prayer would include a prayer to the rice goddess, to the earth goddess, to the local spirits, and then, of course, a prayer to Allah to round it all off and kind of bring it together. So it's really syncretic. And then there's the opening song, which typically addresses the host, pays thanks to the host, tells us what the story is going to be, why we're here, what's being celebrated, so kind of catch everybody up on why this is performed. And then, for several hours, we have alternating scenes and those dances, those galambang that we just saw one sample of, that will alternate. And the story is told in both. It's told through the actual dialogues that are part of the acting, and while the acting is going on, all the dancers will, go, sit down, be pretty relaxed, and then the actors will do the scene, and then when it's ready to go, they'll get up, do their dance again, and then there will be a song accompanying that, also carrying on the story. And the really beautiful thing about that is that through the structure, there's a lot of room for improvisation. What you can do is, let's say you have a show you're planning to do it like a 3-hour show, and you get to the venue and the host says, oh my God, the other singer just, the road got washed out, we can't make it, can you stretch it to 4 hours? And they say, no problem. And they just huddle together, go like, okay, instead of just singing about the scene, let's throw the scene, make that song longer, and they'll adjust, and it's no problem. And the other way is even easier, right? It's like, oh no, my cousin really wants to sing, and he needs a half hour. Can you cut your show by half an hour so we don't run so long and everything? It's like, no problem. Okay, they'll cut out 2 scenes, and then the song will tell you, in the meantime, what happened, and then now we're in scene this, here we are with actor this and scene that. So it's really beautiful how it can flow and be kind of very improvisational within that structure. Yeah. So then, once all that is played out and the story is told, you have closing song, exit parade, and then all the musicians and dancers will be fed by the host, and smoke their cigarettes, and all the audience will wander off to the coffee shop and talk about what they see. And also, of course, the audience, as you might imagine, in a 4 or 5 hour long show, they don't sit down quietly in the dark and only clap at the end, right? It's very much a village entertainment, so people come and go, they sit around, the kids always crowd in as close as they can without getting kicked in the head, with all the slapping going on. And if there's a fighting scene, which there always is, they'll crowd in even closer. And if there's a boring scene where all the people are just talking about proper etiquette and the relationship between generations and the problems of modernization, the kids will run off and do something else and come back for the clown scene, right? Because they kind of know the structure. So it's very, very fluid, and because that as a performer, a lot of people not paying attention all the way through. There's a lot of kind of repetition built into it. So a lot of the songs or scenes will have a little recap. While you were getting your coffee, this and this happened. I mean, I wouldn't say it that way, but basically, in the song will recap what just happened and kind of foreshadow what will happen next. So as an audience member, you're kind of up to speed. Plus, of course, everybody knows the stories. At least the basic story arc of the main characters. So nobody gets lost except for
So do the dancers sing?
Do the dancers sing? Yes, there actually are chorus parts for the dancers, which they will chant along with the singers. But generally speaking, you have two main singers, or if it's a big group, 3 or 4 singers will take turns. And then the actors are also dancers, and they step in and out of the circle.
Okay.
And then all the dancers are also expected to sing at least the chorus lines. We didn't get to actually teaching the song part, the chorus line of our little number, but they would have had to learn Minang, so that was we didn't quite have time for that. So the acting, as you see in this picture, the dancers are kind of sitting on the ground, and the actors that are not in that scene could also be sitting as part of the dancers. So not everybody's in every scene. Typically a scene only has 2 or 3 people in it. And nowadays they do use, unfortunately, microphones. In the old days they did, and especially if you have a microphone with a short cable and a really bad speaker system, like it turns into like karaoke basically, because you're hovering by the thing, and you can't do any of the moves that go with the acting. You just like hold your microphone. So a lot of the groups use it because they feel like they can reach larger audiences that way. Some people don't mind, but some people really also realize, this is really taking away from the genre and really crippling really the expressiveness of the action by having to hold this microphone all the time. So people who are like thinking forward say, well, okay, if we can't get around microphones, let's at least find ways to finance it and get clip-on wireless mics so the hands are freed up and you can actually do the acting. So people are working on that. And as I mentioned earlier, the stories that I used were all coming out of oral tradition. Most of them are still passed on orally. They're local legends, local folk tales, some Arabic stories, but they're really not any Indian epics, which is unusual because most of Indonesia, in some form or another, does have Indian epics as a major part in the performing traditions of, certainly Java, Bali, Sunda, etc. So that kind of shows you again how remote that area was. It probably passed through, but didn't have enough of an impact to actually become part of the repertoire. So I want to talk a little bit about the music, and I just want you to pay, just kind of listen to this. Also one of my favorite shots, because that's like the typical kind of setup of a musical ensemble. Kids hanging out, sleeping. The kid was actually one of the musicians. He would play when he's awake, and then he would like run off and have some snacks and come back, and then at some point he passed out. Gongs and little kettles, does have, of course, a relationship to most of the other Malay music traditions like gamelan and Java and Bali, but it's much simpler in terms of how the instrumentation, much fewer instruments, and they're all portable. So you could actually have one person carry 2 of those kettles and play them on the parade, and then the other people would carry 2 or 3 each, and you'll then walk around through the village announcing there's a performance, and as you get there, you'll put them in this little rack, and then you actually have a stationary ensemble. And then you have percussion in terms of gongs and horns and several drums. And then here's a little sample you can listen to the flute and the singing style. And that's a typical arrangement to have them in the inside of the circle as the dance is going on. Ethnomusicologists think that there's definitely, it's mainly indigenous in terms of the melodic lines and everything, but there's some Arabic influence in some of the songs, especially once the rev up is used, then for sure.
Like the song we did the routine to seems to have Arabic influence.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. This type of singing? What comes to mind when you hear this style?
has real nasal quality to it.
Yeah, it's definitely nasal. It definitely has a like almost staccato feeling to it. Not all the songs are like that, but a lot of them are. There's two general big types of singing. One is called rap talk, which is like sad songs, and then there's dendang, which are considered more happy or more upbeat songs. And actually, frankly, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference if you're not an ethnomusicologist, because in terms of tempo and tonality, they're not that different in the way they kind of come close. But you know, there's extremes on both ends, but it's almost like a continuum. And I think only people really in the culture can tell, you know, where it goes from one to the other in the very near, in the medium, in the middle of the continuum. And then, of course, there's my all-time favorite part of the music, which is the tapuak, or the pan-slapping part, yeah, which is performed by the dancers as they dance, and that's what the students also learn. And it's not easy to get a good sound out of these pans, right? So there's only one really good spot that you have to hit, kind of close to the bottom seam, and you have to tighten it just at the right moment to get the sound. And you have to time it, of course, with everybody else in the group to get one doom instead of like popcorn sounds, right? So you know, it's really not
Can you do
easy.
this for us?
It's not easy to get the sound. And again, you know, sometimes it's easier to do it indoors because you have a little bit of a resonance, versus most of those performances are done outdoors. So to get the actual sound outdoors, you really have to hit right. And it's not so much in terms of power, it's all technique. And it took my students about 2 to 3 months to actually get the right sound. Yeah, so it takes a little bit.
Will you show it one more time, please?
Okay. So, and it's one of my favorite things really about this genre, which really got me started also in wanting to study it. You know, when I heard something about pan slapping percussion, I'm like, that sounds intriguing. You know, I'm a percussionist, I'm a martial artist, and I'm a dancer from my other backgrounds. And so when I heard about that element of Randai, I was very intrigued, of course. And you know, once I actually saw it, you know, like, okay, this is it. You know, I really want to study this form. I'm really intrigued by it. And the pan slapping actually came out, you know, I keep asking, you know, teachers, like, so where does the pan slapping idea come from? Because there's other traditions like Samoan body percussion, you know, there's other kinds of cultures that have body percussion, but none that I know of that has pan slapping like this, right? So I asked, so where does it come from? And most practitioners agree that it actually came out of Silat, where they wear pants, and not quite that low of a crotch, but very loose pants. So actually, if you kick, you know, sometimes I guess it was used to just alert either your partner in practice, or you know, add a little flourish in a competition, or just warn somebody that, you know, you're about to kick or you're about to strike. And then somebody probably went like, oh, this sounds really cool, and you know, somebody just started jamming, I would think, you know, and just like playing around with it. And then since Silat and Randai are so closely connected, it makes perfect sense that something that had such a potential for a dramatic element then became developed in its own unique major character feature, you know, for this theater form. So, okay, so the training, as I said, everybody who's in the Randai ensemble is expected to have basic martial arts training for at least a couple of years. And the Silat training is generally separated by gender, but girls are also now allowed to participate in Silat. In the old days, it was mainly done in the surau, the men's house, once the boys got kind of, you know, kicked out from the mom's house and were then educated by the men. But nowadays, with the school system and the performing arts academies and everything, it's completely open and everybody's allowed. But if you go to a village Silat, what's called the aliran, or like a Silat practice group or, you know, school, they will practice at the same time, but in different locations off on the practice ground. And the teacher will go around and practice with the girls as well. But generally, you will not allow boys and girls to practice together unless they're siblings, and then it's okay. So, you know, Islamic etiquette and just, you know, proper behavior is definitely also used and enforced in the context of training for Silat. There's, of course, other things you have to learn if you want to be a Randai member. You will learn all the singing, you will learn probably one of the instruments, or, you know, at least the basic percussion and talimpong playing. And nowadays also, with the emergence of festivals and all kinds of other competitive situations where Randai is performed, people are also more into actually playwriting and actually writing down the scripts, you know, which wasn't really happening until like the 80s. So this is a very recent development, that now people are also actually paying attention to the actual text and trying to refine it a little bit more. And also trying to like get rid of some of the improvisation, which can sometimes be sad, because you know the improvisation really is what makes it so attractive to the audience often, because you know they'll pick up on local events and they can make fun of whatever the latest corruption scandal in town down the river or whatever. So you know some of that can be controlled more, but it can also be used. So it kind of it's hard to really judge it. It goes both ways. So that brings me to where's Randai now? So in the last 15 years, what I've been like studying and watching it develop, have been some major changes in the genre. From having, for example, a lot of female impersonators in all male groups still in the more remote areas, to now like only 2 being left in 2008. Yeah, and it becomes a little bit less accepted in a way, and it's probably due to the fact that you know Islam doesn't really like cross-dressing, certainly, you know, and then also people watch more TV and are just more used to like you know Western-style realism, so that boys dressed up as girls just doesn't quite sit well with the younger generation who's learning it. There's still a few groups who do it, and there's even still a few groups who go the other way, where it's like all girls troops now, which is a total reversal from what it used to be, where they also then play the boys' roles. Yeah. And those are often in government schools. You know, for some reason, they use Randai as an educational tool, and then sometimes if you have an all-girls school, you know, you have to like take all the performers we have. So it's kind of, overall the trend is, I would say, to have more mixed gender groups and everybody playing, I mean, every gender playing its own roles, right? So we don't have any more cross-gender casting that much. Government supports also really kind of stepped up and actually have their own troops in the cities that are supported, and the teachers are paid a small salary to actually teach the younger generation Randai and teach them also about government programs through Randai. And then those Randai groups are sent out on little tours through the countryside, and they, of course, bring with them government programs or policies that they want to enforce, you know, sanitation, family planning, you know, all kinds of other programs like this whole thing about Gotong Royong, which means working together so that villages can actually draft free labor from everybody in the village to work on common projects like, you know, irrigation ditch or rice field, terracing, all of that things. So those kind of uses of Randai have a continuation from the earlier days when Randai was really used to teach about adat, etiquette, proper behavior, you know, how you should raise your children, then integrating Islamic teachings, and now the most recent integration is integrating government programs and policies, and maybe you want to call it even propaganda in some cases, because it's really also about, you know, national unity and nationalism and all of those aspects that became very prominent after Indonesia reached independence. And then another point I want to just touch upon briefly, since we talked about Islamic influences a little bit too, is that some of the original stories that come out of the Adat tradition, the matrilineal tradition, the pre-Islamic tradition, are now kind of being rewritten often to reflect either a stronger, for example, father figure instead of the mother figure, or the uncle figure, which is the mother-brother, which in the old traditional Adat had more control or more say or more authority in the family than the biological father often. Yeah, so that's a major shift. Then integration of Islamic prayers, or, you know, main characters come back, instead of from Rantau, the characters come back from Hajj. Yeah, so that's a big shift, yeah, to make that change in character histories. And many other things, like, you know, including, for example, Islamic prayer recital competition instead of a silat competition as a featured, you know, moment of conflict in a play. So a lot of things are being changed around, and then it kind of goes both ways, because again, some of the more remote villages, you know, they're now moving back to more traditional Adat, and they're digging up some of the older stories that were almost lost. So that's a good trend. It goes more broad. And then modern themes, as I mentioned earlier, definitely are also very important. You know, people not coming back from Randai, for example, is one. Urbanization, modernization, problems of generation conflicts, you know, environmental degradation, really totally modern topics are also picked up in Randai often. Often not necessarily as the most central topic, but it's something that the main character might improvise on, or that might be referenced. So a lot of those things are the more interesting things that are happening now with Randai in the current decade. But are we close to time there?
We have a little time. Or we can take questions too.
Yeah, we can take questions. So we actually perform Randai at the University of Hawaii, and as Claire said in her introduction, we bring in, or I bring in my teachers, guest artists from Sumatra to train my students for about 6 months in an intensive training program, and then they perform a traditional Randai play. Although we're trying to do a more modern one next time, and we do it in translation, so our audiences can actually understand it. And it's quite a lovely experience for the students because they get to, it's almost like going to the field. It's a real almost immersion program because they spend several hours, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours with the teachers every day, learn the form. Some of them speak some Indonesian, so they can definitely improve their language. As I mentioned the other day, was it with somebody, I can't remember, the last time we did a Randai was right during Ramadan, so we had to adjust our teaching schedule, and then some of the students actually went so far as to actually fast with the teachers to get the experience, right? We did make some allowances on water because, it was just, it's Hawaii. It was really hard to train and not drinking all day. So, we made, some allowances for that. But yeah, the students were really kind of gung-ho about, trying it out and showing their solidarity with the teachers. So that was a really great experience. So we're doing another one in 2011. We're already working on that. So.
And so when will the training begin?
The training will begin August 2011, and then the show will be February or March 2012.
So they train for like a semester and a half?
We train for a semester and a half, pretty much, yeah.
So that's basically what they do then as their, that's an immersion program if they're spending that much time a day?
They also have other classes, some of the work. So it's, but they do an Asian production every year, so that's just part of the program. It's pretty intense though, yeah.
Yeah.
You basically don't do anything other than, especially once it gets closer to the show, that's all you do. You rehearse and you sleep, maybe. Maybe you eat occasionally, yeah. So Ramadan came in handy. You didn't have to worry about cooking or anything. No, it saved a lot of time. Oh boy. Okay, so I think at this point we can open it up to questions or comments. Or
sure. Who would like to ask questions of Professor Kauka?
I have a question. So is Randai done all over Sumatra? Is it done wider than Sumatra?
It's just done in West Sumatra province, which is the homeland of the Minangkabau people. But then, as I said, the Minang actually travel a lot, and they have like little expat communities in other parts of Sumatra, and also as far as Jakarta, and as far as Malaysia and Negri Sembilan. So there are pockets of enough Minang people in places that sometimes they get together and have a Randai group there. So there's a couple in Jakarta. There's two I know of in Kuala Lumpur. There's one up in Medan on the tip of Sumatra. And so there's groups like that, but none of them are professional. I mean, no Randai group is professional. There are some that have skill level on professional level. They're really good performers, but nobody can really make a living as a Randai performer. So unfortunately, they all have, they're either teachers or they work in some government office, or they're still students if it's a younger group. Or they drive a bus or whatever. Everybody has a job on the side.
Can you comment a little bit on? We read a little bit about this in the reviews, but the composition of the group, so the age range, and what kinds of people end up in these Randai groups, how many of them there are, and how long they might stay with the practice, and then whether their styles differ from group to group.
Yeah, it's quite diverse actually. There's 400 plus Randai groups in the province of West Sumatra, which has a population of about 1.5 million. So every village kind of has a group, or at least within the smaller district, there's definitely a Randai group. And it's quite different. The further upland, the further into the mountains you go, the more traditional the group composition is, where it's mainly older teachers and then the younger generation to be, educated in Randai and through Randai. And then as you get to the towns, it could be all the same age people because they're all in a class together, or it's in some kind of government group that is in a certain neighborhood, and then the parents send their kids to study Randai because it's part of the culture. And the few groups that have quite a diverse range of age are typically the village groups. And women generally only participate in the groups until they get married, and then they're kind of expected to take care of the family, and then but the guys are free to stay on and still play Randai, right? So not quite fair there sometimes, but a few of the female performers have actually gone on and stayed in Randai, oftentimes as like the lead singer. So they have the authority of being the lead singer, so they can say, well, you can't do Randai without me, so, and it's true, because the singing is really such a big, important part of it.
And when you go from village to village, do you see differences in
There's
styles?
quite a lot of, because there's, as I said, there's 12 major silat styles within just the province of West Sumatra. And depending on what silat style is the more dominant one in a certain region, the steps and the movements that are used in the Randai of that area will also reflect that. Like some would be really low, they have really low stances for everything. And then others have a little bit higher stance. I mean, the footwork will be similar, but just in terms of the body placement might be, so that might be a very obvious, distinction right the moment you see it. Others have a lot more elaboration on the fingers, and they might use their eyes with it, or they have, in terms of the speed, how people move might be different. Also in terms of how difficult the movements might be, is that some just use the dance, and they may only have a repertoire of maybe 15 different moves, and they just repeat every time they do a dance. It's slightly rearranged, but it's kind of like the same. And other groups have quite an amazing, spectacular range of, with jumps and kicks and partner drills woven into it. And it's like, wow, amazing, So it's really, it's quite different in terms of the regional styles and how they influence it.
And how many people are in a typical Randai group?
Well, you need generally an even number, so between 10 and 16 is about the right number, because a lot of the dances have actually partner drills in it. They're also coming out from like partner drills in the martial arts, so you definitely need an even number. And you need to stay in the same order, because if you have to turn this way or that way, and you're always partnering with the same person, you can't be just jumping around anywhere in the circle. So every time you go in, and then some people stay as actors and everybody else recedes, when you come back in to get them and come back out, they need to find just the right spot. We had so much trouble with that when we did it in Hawaii, because it was so tricky to, as the circle keeps going and the actors move around, then it's like, okay, where was I? You find your spot in like 2 seconds to get back into the next dance. So, it takes a lot of anticipation, so yeah.
So it's all based around the circle, and you
It's
always have the circle.
only time there's no circle is like the intro and the exit parades when it's lines. And then when the acting, sometimes you'll have the circle of the dancers sitting, and all of the acting takes place inside the circle, except for if there's a traveling scene. Somebody might actually walk around the outside of the circle just to indicate somebody's walking through the forest, and then finally coming into the house or into the location. So obviously there's no props and no scenery and none of that. There might be little handheld props, but that's about it. Other questions, comments?
Do you observe any subtle changes in style in the time that you've been there in terms of the
Not
younger
subtle.
generations coming
Yeah,
back?
not subtle. There's some major changes. There's this Malay pop music called dangdut, which became wildly popular like in the late 90s, mid-90s to late 90s, and has kind of, I would call it, infiltrated the music of Randai, and has really kind of taken over a lot of the traditional music, and with it also the traditional movement, because now a lot of groups don't do basic silat moves anymore, but they're just like doing this kind of stuff, and that's neither Minang nor silat nor anything related to culture. But it's kind of like this kind of disco version of whatever it is, yeah. And it's become popular. It's also fading in popularity again, thankfully. I know, I'm very opinionated. I have tastes, and I admit them, and I prefer the silat-based stuff, because it's just, first of all, it's so much more difficult to do. So it actually takes some real skill. The other one is almost like, okay, it could work as social dance, but as a performance, it's kind of very boring to watch, frankly. If people just like walk around in circles snapping their fingers all the time. So. anyway, it's kind of gone really popular, and then actually it got so bad that the judges and the panels who put on those competitions and festivals restricted the groups who wanted to participate in the festivals or in the kind of competitions basically. You can only have maximum 3 dangdut songs in there. The rest got to be traditional Minang, or you just can't enter. Yeah. So, and now that's kind of been the standard that people kind of realize.
How often do they have these competitions and festivals?
Well, they have one really big one every 5 years. That's kind of All Pan West Sumatra Festival. So it goes for months and months and months in every district of the province. You know, they have, and then they have the finalists, and then it all kind of leads up to the big, you know, World Cup almost level of the final in the capital then.
Have you ever competed with your group?
No. I've performed with a couple of the groups I studied with, but not on that level. No, that just would be too much pressure. And it would be not fair because, you know, I would stand out quite a bit and it's just not fair to the other groups.
Can you talk about that a little bit, what it feels like as a Western Caucasian woman who's
Sure.
not from the culture to be performing in the culture?
Well, not so, I mean, the performing part is one thing, but just like being there is already throwing the whole thing off kilter because, you know, people watching me watching the performance instead of watching the performance. You know, and so it takes for me to be there for quite a while until, especially the kids kind of calm down and get used to the fact that there's somebody, not just me as a person, but me with all my equipment, right? Camera, this and that, and running around interviewing people like this one woman roadshow, right? The kids love it, and the adults love it too, but they're not quite as, you know, they don't like come running and ask questions. But everybody's really watching me the whole time, and so it takes a lot of patience and just like sitting quietly and just waiting until the novelty is worn off. And that's of course every time I go to a new place. And I think I rode around, what, 5,000 miles in a year on a motorcycle going different villages. So I'm basically in a different place every night, you know. So every time I have to go through this whole routine of like, you know, talking to, you know, the elders in the village, making sure it's okay, and then get everybody used to my presence.
Do you travel with a translator, or do you?
I speak Indonesian, and I picked up enough little Minang to kind of get by.
Is Indonesian like the national language?
Indonesian is
and
kind of the
everybody speaks
national lingua franca.
it? And then
Lingua
Minang is
franca.
kind of what they speak.
And
at home?
Minang is the ethnic language of that group. And there's like 300, 400 different languages, ethnic languages. So they're quite different. I have no idea, I can't understand a word of Balinese, you know, or Japanese. It's all definitely totally different languages. You know, so if you study Indonesian, it's really helpful because, first of all, everybody speaks Indonesian, and for almost everybody there, it's also their second language. So you're almost on the same level in terms of language skills. So that's a good thing sometimes. Yeah, sometimes it's not, because the moment you really want to express something about their own culture, they automatically switch to Minang and go like, oh, wait a minute, you know, now I need a translator.